What's going on, everybody? I am extremely honored and excited to have Casey here. I've worked with Casey for years across a couple different teams at Hashicorp. He has also been, like some of the other people you've seen on these interviews, someone I consider, here comes the pressure, kind of a mentor in a way. I asked Casey a ton of questions. I think it takes himself very seriously as a mentor, as you can see. Especially when I got curious about management and what that kind of track looks like for an engineer. Some of the most insightful and interesting things that I heard from people came from this guy. So Casey, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
That's very nice of you. I appreciate the compliment. I'm glad somebody thinks the words that come out of my mouth are useful at times, because I'm not sure that they are.
I think that's the right place to be, though, in terms of like confidence against real life. I think that's what staying humble in that way is why you're successful. It's like you have that engineering mindset about everything, including maybe these words I say will be useful, and then
Yeah.
statistically I can like use that in
The
aggregate.
engineering mindset is, even when you're right, you're probably wrong, and someone's probably able to prove it. So you just do the best you can along the way and hope it works out.
I think it's a great mindset, and I think that's one of the things that I fell in love with at HashiCorp, which is that that mindset is like everywhere. As sad as it makes me that you have decided to move on, I understand that it's probably the one company that we would all have to say yes to, just to like see what all the hype is about.
Yeah.
It's the one that's all the primary college that got famous for having slides in its offices, and like I'm assuming there's like a fire pole that you slide down on your first day. So
It seems like there's just about everything you could like in the office. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, the Google is probably the only company that could entice me away from HashiCorp, which has been sort of the dream company up for the past few years, which has been really nice.
yeah. So that being said, I think maybe that's a good place to start, is like kind of what you just said, that humility, the engineering mindset in general, and then not being super married to your own opinions or to being right. Sorry, Bagel's growling in the background.
Hi, Bagel.
Hi, Bagel. He says, "What's up, dude?" That is one of the main things that I loved immediately about HashiCorp. There's lots of other things. What were some of the kind of cultural things that that are so great about HashiCorp that really enticed you, like when you were applying, when you showed up, when you started working there?
Yeah, HashiCorp, a lot of companies, when you get in the door or when you're being interviewed, will claim to be engineering driven. And what they're often trying to tell you is that the person in the recruiter seat feels like engineering gets to dictate how the company goes. And that's definitely the vibe at some of the places I've worked at before. That's what engineering driven meant, was just that the engineers had the biggest vote when whatever issue was presented to the company came up. I don't think that's the engineering driven mindset that HashiCorp has. I think the engineering mindset is one that not not one that performs experimentation regularly. It's one that is willing to perform experimentation and modify any process at any time if it's the point that's identified as needing improvement. And that idea is certainly applicable to software development, which is constantly changing, constantly fluid, but always needs to retain an eye on where it came from, on the existing code and infrastructure. But that engineering mindset is applicable to every piece of a business. I think it's just the idea of not experimenting just for fun to have experiments, but being willing to iterate on process. Iterate is probably the better word over experimentation. Like,
Yeah,
be willing to inspect anything and make it better and figure out how to make it better. And like I joked in the beginning, engineering really is whatever problem you're presented with, there will be a collection of ways to solve it. All of them have trade-offs, and the job isn't figuring out which one of them is best generically. The job is figuring out which one of them is best given the trade-offs that you've correctly identified. That's where the skill really comes in. So what HashiCorp did better than anyone that I've gotten to work with up to this point was instilled that engineering mindset as best as I could see into as many of the process developments as it could.
you know, you've just completed interviews for, you know, some very fancy tech companies, and I mean, I think Google has always been kind of like the gold standard, like the most mythical, fearsome interview, what, knowing what you know and having actually experienced it and succeeded, and this doesn't just apply to FAANG companies. I think just targeting FAANG company and FAANG companies and those styles of interviews is maybe a mistake. There's a lot of very, very good tech companies to work for that aren't in the top, 5 or whatever, that you might even be happier at. Come back, Casey. But what are your kind of like lessons learned and tips that you would give in that very like creative thinking Casey way that you have? What would you tell people?
Like, I would first start by saying, don't think of any of the FAANG as the top of the career ladder. Like this isn't a single line of companies that go from small to big, and the one that's at the very top is the one that you need to be working at. Big means something very different. The number of people that are in Google, Facebook, Amazon, the rest, compared to even a company like Hashicorp, just means it's an entirely different company to work at. Hashicorp is in an interesting place right now because we still have people that came from smaller startups and work at Hashicorp, but we also have people that came from much bigger enterprise companies and now work at Hashicorp. And they're both good. They just have very different perspectives on how things are meant to work, how things have worked in the past. And the sort of stress and unknown and fluidity of early startup life or small company life, or a small company that's not a hyper growth company like Hashicorp that has more of a steady state growth. Those kind of companies, you go in and you develop relationships with individuals and you get onto a team, and that team is essentially in the pit with you, doing all the work alongside of you, and you build camaraderie, and trust is really important because you're putting yourself out there completely and trusting that the people around you are going to support you and do the things that they need to be doing. At a bigger company, that stuff is less important. Like, there is enough available in the system that just given enough time, given enough buffer space, it'll all settle to pretty okay no matter what. And that feeling isn't the same at a startup. It's not the same at a medium-sized company either. So don't just chase FAANG. Go try it if it's something that seems intriguing to you. But along the way, as you're inspecting process for yourself, also inspect what size felt good, what style of company felt good for me along the way, which place gave me, sort of setting aside, I had a toxic manager over here, or my director over here was really awesome. Setting aside the individuals of it, there is a way companies at different sizes feel and operate. And interviewing is a really good example of it. At smaller companies, you interview with an individual that is likely on the team you're applying for. They ask you questions and you figure out if there's a fit between your skill set and the company. At a big company like Google, you go in interviewing with essentially a pool. The people that I interviewed with, none of them knew each other, none of them knew me. They didn't know what team I was going to. In fact, in the process, we hadn't even bothered to find a team for me to end up in yet. That came after the interview circuit, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind in the beginning, is when you interview somewhere smaller, you're trying to make an impression on the people that you'll end up working with. You go somewhere bigger, you're trying to beat the process. You're trying to get past a goal point for a little while. And you still have to be kind and considerate and honest and open about what it is you do, but it's less about making an impression just on the individual for the long term. It's about making an impression on them long enough to get you 5 stars in whatever rating system they're putting up, right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So given that you just said it's not important, what are the study tips for beating the system?
You have to actually study. It's the same way that anytime anybody finds out how magic works, how magicians work, the magic of being a magician is that you just do the thing so many times that no one believes that you would do that thing that many times. The only way you get past these technical interviews without it overwhelming you is you practice everything that they tell you to practice. Google was really useful in that they give you a list. They give you a list of every topic that might come up. And that list is basically all of your computer science degree. So it's a lot, but it's the list. It's real. And if you want to spend, as much time getting ready for it, you could do that list every day, practice it, and get pretty close. I went in, they asked, how long would you like, after meeting the recruiter, how long would you like before you start your technical interviews? And the most they would give you is 5 weeks. So I took the entirety of the 5 weeks. And every day I studied more and I tried to accomplish a problem. I would code it. I would write it on a piece of paper. I would just work through problems every day for 5 weeks. And when I ended up doing the interview, I didn't get asked a single one of those questions, not a single one. There was no multiple choice thing. It was me talking to engineers that worked at Google and them having come up with a cool problem that they think they could relate to somebody on, and us just kind of building it together. But having gone through that process gave me a really solid foundation to stand on when I was talking with people that we had no shared context with one another. You have to be willing to take a problem on immediately and load up as much as you need as fast as you need it.
Yeah, it's like a dictionary for speaking their language, basically.
It's just a way, it's a cache, really. It's just caching a bunch of background knowledge that maybe you'll need, but probably you won't. And knowing that it's there is comforting. Because if the last time you looked at big O notation was discrete systems or discrete math back in sophomore year of college, you're gonna panic in that interview. Yeah. It's gonna make you turn red, and you're not gonna remember how to do big O. Now that I'm done with the interview, I still don't fucking know how to do big O. I still don't know how big O works. I think it's probably just a lie, but you need that thing for a little bit. The interview ended up being incredibly practical, which I really appreciated. And I think they've had to evolve their practice over time to get away from the sort of brain teaser questions and towards system design questions, practical interview questions that really get to what we've been talking about, which is, can you get a feel for how capable of an engineer this person is?
I just want to give a quick thank you to interviewing.io for sponsoring this video. You might pick this up from my videos and especially my interviews with friends, but the top tier tech companies are paying honestly insane salaries for software engineers right now. The problem is that their interviews are often difficult and even great developers can fail because they don't know what to expect or how they should prepare. At interviewing.io, you can practice realistic coding interviews with senior engineers from those top tier companies that you're trying to get into. They'll not only give you mock interviews that train you for the real thing, but you'll also get detailed feedback on exactly what you need to work on to improve your chances. They've got the largest network of vetted and experienced tech interviewers in the world, so you can book an interview with as little as 24 hours notice. And here's the crazy part, which is why I'm talking about it here. You don't have to pay until you're hired. Yeah, so they're not just making money by selling you a dream. The only way they get paid is if you get paid. So if you want to get hired at top tech companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, click the link in the description below and have a look. There's a ton of recorded interviews for you to stream, so you can see how it works right now.
Yeah, so I would actually love to rewind and go to, what's your kind of general track through this industry? Did you go to school for this? Kind of how did you get in? What's in broad strokes your kind of path through tech?
Yeah, sure. Man, mine's interesting because along the way, I got to help people coming down the totally alternate path, which gave me a really useful perspective moving forward. But yeah, I got my degree in computer science at the University of Texas in Dallas. Went on to an out of college job after the 2008 recession, which was just like, hey, I get to have a job after college. That's cool. So it really wasn't like the first career mover. Ended up at Dell pretty early on a team that was an acquisition for them, which was kind of the perfect situation because I got to sort of get thrown into the startup mindset of development, not a ton of overhead from process, just a lot of focus on crafting a team of individuals that had diverse skill sets enough to be able to move any particular product forward. And that team was really informative to me. The manager on that team was also sort of, for this acquired company, like their CTO, sort of. He didn't have that title, but he was sort of at that level. So he got a lot of leeway in crafting his team and gave us a designer on staff, gave us 2 front-end engineers that were good at application development, gave us a really deep backend engineer, put me in that was sort of a through the stack, full stack junior engineer. So he got to build out the team in a way that made it a really productive, isolated team. Everything you needed was within that team, and it allowed us to move really fast. So we were building total greenfield products that ended up sort of being experimentations of future product lines for the company, not Dell as the company, but Dell Case as the company, which let us use a lot of tech that they hadn't used before. When I came in, it was all spaghetti PHP code. And by the third product that we had released, we'd moved from spaghetti PHP to Symfony PHP to Ruby on Rails. And along the way, learned some DevOps stuff. So this thing that we built was a mobile device manager and like an inventory compliance tool thing for IT departments. But it was a piece of hardware. It was an actual like server that you racked into your colo or in the closet that your company had to track all your assets internally. So one of the things that was really important for it was the server came off of Dell's assembly line with our golden image on it. And when it turned on, the startup script needed to start everything. It needed to download all the updates. It needed to make sure it connected to the internet. And this was 2012. So it was still at that like early days of AWS when people really weren't yet comfortable putting everything in the cloud. So this was sort of a transition point. But it let me get exposure to, nobody even called it DevOps tools back then. It was just configuration management. We were using Puppet and Vagrant. Vagrant became a part of our workflow immediately. And at the time, I didn't recognize that Vagrant from Hashicorp. Hashicorp didn't exist back then. It was just Mitchell's repo. I didn't realize it was also brand new. It became such a critical part of our workflow that you couldn't do anything without it. So it was my first exposure to Hashicorp's tooling. And in comparison to everything else, and sort of at the same time as I was learning opinionated software development through Ruby on Rails, I was using Vagrant. And then later on, I used Packer for a lot of things. And at the same time, learning other DevOps tools with Puppet and stuff. But I fell in love with Hashicorp's workflow mentality in job one, in my real first job. You know, I had a job before that, but it was.
It feels like that job. It's funny because this is going to sound like one huge HashiCorp tool ad. I apologize in advance.
My career path has been a HashiCorp tool ad.
Same.
That job was when I decided I want to go work with these people.
Yeah,
I was working at Dell when they hired Jack as the first employee. And I remember getting that email like, oh, this is going to be a company. That's where I would like to be working. And
the mothership. My
hang up had been, you know, they're doing DevOps tools, and DevOps, no one was called, again, I said,
sure, it was pre thought leadership, TM and Scrum Masters.
You know, back then you were using those tools if you were a sysadmin that was trying to modernize. You weren't yet using those tools if you were an application dev trying to set up infrastructure, because you couldn't. There wasn't, you know, unless you had a big wallet connected to an AWS account, you couldn't just easily go spin stuff up and experiment in the same way that you could now. So the next few jobs after that, I kind of manipulated the career path to allow me to continue to use Ruby on Rails, which was a focal point of my career for a really long time, but also input some DevOps stuff. My job right before Hashicorp, I got to lead our transition from on-prem colo to GCP. I shifted everything to cloud assets. And along the way, I used it as an excuse to develop applications in Go, our orchestration and management tools in Go. Learn some more Ansible. First time I got to use Terraform for anything for real. And we deployed Consul everywhere. And I remember in 2016, I went to the HashiConf EU in Amsterdam, and we were having like a post-conference speakers dinner. This was before I worked there. I just got to be a speaker. And I was sitting next to John Benson, who was like sales for a long time at Hashicorp. He was just the entire sales department. And I was sitting there telling him, yeah, so I just did a lift and shift of my company's entire infrastructure from on-prem to GCP. Everything's going really well. We did it with Terraform, Consul's in there. What does Consul do? Like, we had deployed it to everywhere and it was giving us service access, but it still hadn't clicked that like you have to change your application structure along the way to really get the full performance out of the tools that are being introduced. Like at that point, Terraform was just using Consul as state storage, and that's all I got out of having a Consul node on every deployed instance. So there was a long period of like slow accumulation of knowledge in the space that Hashicorp was in. Coming to Hashicorp, where I ended up finding a job that was just a Ruby on Rails application developer job. And it turns out I didn't actually need all of the DevOps stuff to begin with. So.
What I love is and this is what I was going to say before, it's like how, and you just said it again perfectly, how the Hashitools kind of grew alongside us as we were solving these like early DevOps problems. Yes, Barry's going to beat me for saying that as much as I do, but I feel like before there was a name for a DevOps team or whatever they call it now, DevOps engineer as a role, it's like what you described at your first job is such a perfect description, I thought, of these teams that really were doing kind of the DevOps philosophy, putting that into practice as a small cross-functional team, like no wasted motion, everybody kind of doing a few different things and having an understanding of more than just their tiny focused part of the stack or the product. And that is what gives you that agility. It's not like, oh, like, but how did you do it, Casey, without 2 Scrum Masters? Like, you know, it's
like
and
the
purest
two
expression
products that we put out, you know, I think both ended up getting shelved not long after I left that company, but the tools that we learned, Rails, Vagrant, Terraform, the rest of it, those have been persisted. So sometimes you'll end up at a place where you're building a product and it seems like that is the end all be all, like that is the focus and the point, but you're really doing a lot of ancillary things along the way that themselves are the point. This idea that I remember being early in my career and thinking that a pivot meant a company had got something wrong and had to restructure its entire point of being. And the reality isn't that the pivot is, sometimes it is, sometimes you have to completely flip script and turn into a new company, but a lot of times you're just refocusing what you've built all of these amazing processes and tooling systems on a different problem, a slightly different problem. And it's really not that big of a shift as it feels like at first. There's a lot to be learned from things, there's a lot to be gained from the process of engineering outside of the end product.
Yeah, I think that's also one of those reasons why, like I love how you just divided that into sort of, it's not wasted effort because the practitioner, like the person working on the thing they learn new tooling and they learn new workflows. And then the company or the organization learns by having those better workflows kind of replace what they were doing before. Like at the end, you're not doing this like more waterfall-y thing. You're doing a much more agile, like release frequently type of thing. The tooling supports that, but that's the learning that stays, even if the individual product gets shelved a week later or not. It's like that is what is persistent, and that's what you're really iterating on.
That's what you're actually, you know, companies don't just magically exist once you hire all the right people. Those people have to come in and build the entity that is this company. And something that I think has been really impressive, because I've been at other companies where the founders didn't do this with Hashicorp, is that Mitchell and Armand learned really early on that this company wasn't an extension of them as individuals. It was a project that they got to work on, and it quickly turned into its own thing, separate from them, because of them, but separate from them. And they brought the right people in to take on the roles at this company that could do those jobs at the right time. And I think at this point, we've kind of got 2 counterexamples in the world. We've got Amazon that has been focused on Jeff Bezos' mission this entire time, and it's done incredibly well. And you've got Google, where Sergey and Larry stepped aside really early on, and it's also doing incredibly well. So either way, I think, can work given different conditions. But I've always appreciated that Mitchell and Armand were forward-thinking enough to know that there were better people to do particular jobs, and that it wouldn't change what the company would end up being because of it. Or maybe it did, but it wasn't just them.
But you're right, you can see that flexibility in the company. I mean, you can see that they weren't just like, well, we're getting paid for like a vagrant pro, so that's what this company is going to be like. Get out of here with your other stuff. It's like they had that mindset and they were flexible and they let other people, you know, and the community guide them about what was needed. I think that, I mean, as big as it has become, it's still, there's still this feeling of like, if you have a really good idea for something, like there's people you can talk to, there's like departments you can be a part of, like just that are sort of incubators for good ideas.
It's harder to get it through. I mean, like there are more
Sure.
filters along the way, but there has to be at a certain point. Like
Yeah.
the company has to, companies of this size have to, the requirements change. It's no longer just building applications and putting in table stakes. It's building in the support structure around those applications that can give your massive Fortune 500 companies the confidence that you're not going to just wither away next week. You have to be, you have to show different things when you're trying to convince someone that you'll survive the next 10 years.
Yep. How was it at Hashicorp, and kind of what was that experience like when you joined? Because that's kind of where we backtracked from.
Good.
And then can you kind of take us from there and your impression to into sort of also the transition to type of, I guess, the management type things that you do now?
Yeah, so Hashicorp started in very much the early phase startup phase when I came in 2018. You had a job to do, which was, you know, here's the task, here's the piece that you need to go focus on. But your real job was also pay attention to everything that's happening right now. And if something is wrong or bad or broken, fix it. Don't tell someone that it needs to be fixed. Fix it, because no one else is coming in to do this right now. Like at the very beginning, we only hired very, very senior engineers, and that only hiring senior engineers gets you a really particular work style, and that is not sustainable through the entire life cycle of a company. It's not what you want to encourage. But if you need to move as fast as possible and you have the capacity to hire the right people, you can be incredibly productive with those people. So early on, it was very much get a project, go into your silo, and come back when this is done and good. And make a lot of mistakes along the way, miss a lot of stuff along the way. I remember my very first feature that I pushed out. I pushed it and left for vacation that weekend. And I had completely failed to update any of the documentation because it was my first feature, so I had no idea that documentation even existed. I'd never worked at a company important enough to have documentation before. So I was like, I pushed it and I came back, and my manager at the time was like, we need to have a talk. Sorry.
It's like our big swings include documentation here.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, you have to do really big stuff and do it quick, but also like there's still table stakes that have to be, there's still some line items that have to be checked off the list along the way. So the process of Hashicorp growing was really those two things competing with one another. The things that are a requirement that can't be left behind getting done versus the things that must be done now, but no one knows what they are. Like, what's the priority between these two? And over time, the things that we know about and the people that need to be told and the documentation and the process has been given more and more focus and priority, as it should, which means the individual siloed projects just get smaller and take longer. You
that makes sense.
Do as much across as wide of a breadth of things. You know, like you saw this happen. We ripped out and replaced the entire authentication management system and did it in a way that it was nearly seamless for the end customer. Whereas 2 years prior, we would have ripped it out and made it very much not seamless for the end customer.
It's like, all right, everyone's going to have to go through the password reset thing or whatever. Right. It's like, would have been the notification. No, but I mean, I think even in that year, I can see sort of both worlds, because when I joined, I was sort of almost exactly a year after you. I think I was beginning of like January, first couple of weeks of January 2019. You could see both worlds. You could see like I walked in and someone we both know who wrote a lot of the infrastructure and sort of runs that part of the house now to some degree, like pulled me into a meeting room in San Francisco and gave me a 2.5 hour whiteboard presentation drawing out all of the infrastructure. And that was like the document, that's where the documentation was at. I looked at it, I tried to ask intelligent, tricky questions based on my quick understanding of it. And I literally made a copy of everything he wrote down, just drew it in my little notebook that I brought along. Kids, bring a notebook to your first day of work. And I literally just like went back to the hotel that night and just like memorized it, wrote down more questions I had. And the next day I like pushed infrastructure code. Like I pushed Terraform that changed a thing that could have broken a thing, but didn't, because
there was a time like
you need that level of autonomy on engineers at that stage, I feel like.
one of the things that I like shifted during my time as an engineering manager was when I started as an engineer at Hashicorp and when I started as an engineering manager, which was a year apart from one another, around a year. What we said was the amount of time you had to really onboard was like a month. Like you had a month to kind of get up to productivity, and then you needed to be running full speed. And you could in the beginning, because the systems, though they were already complex, they were complex not because of their breadth, they were complex because they had had no cohesive structure to them yet. In some ways, it was just a lot of building on top of one another, right? So it was easy to go in and learn what you needed to because you were probably going to rip out everything that you didn't need. As we kept going, and as I got into managing and bringing on more people, it stopped being a month of going from 0 to productive. It started being closer to 3 to 6 months of being 0 to productive, because the problem wasn't just how complicated is this code anymore. It was, this code is being manipulated by a team of 100 different people that has ancillary stack, not ancillary, but surrounding staff of probably in the multiple hundreds that all rely on it being predictable. You can't just go in and rip something out and replace it. You have to tell people at the bare minimum, and probably along the way, a lot of stuff needs to change and evolve.
Yeah, that stuff starts having a gravity of its own, kind of like you were describing. It's like you build a lot, but that has to be maintained. Yeah, your little rocket ship gets heavier. Just you add mass, and then every directional change just costs you more energy because all that mass has to be accelerated.
The leadership team during my time in engineering management and as an engineer noticed this. They noticed the productivity of our product decreasing, and they would come in and put pressure on us. Why are we moving so slow? Here's a thing that I think we would have been able to get done this quickly in the past. Why is it now taking so long? And what was interesting going from the engineer seat to the engineering manager seat was seeing the full width of what that inquiry really is. It's not just, a lot of times, especially if the company is toxic, or if the company has a poor culture, or the culture is just focused on squeezing every drop out of its engineers that it can, that question is just, why aren't you moving fast enough anymore? And it's directed at the engineers as a collective problem. Like, you are the thing that is slowing us down, you are the bottleneck. And I don't think it was that at Hashicorp. It certainly felt like that at times, because when you're under pressure, it's hard to see the entirety of what's causing it. But it was also, what's slowing you down that's around you? What are the things that are around you that are bad right now that are making this hard for you? Give me an actual accurate estimate of how long this is going to take, not so that I can fight with you and tell you you've asked for too much, but so that I can have that metric and know the process around me is subpar right now, or we've built something that is now cumbersome, or we have failed to build something in process, not an application. We've failed to build something that is critical now that we're at this point. As we were as I was an engineering manager, I felt like every process we had in place was built for the company we were 6 months prior. Because the company was going, and we are adding so many people every month that in my time at the company, we've gone from a 190 person company in 4 years to 1,600 people. Those are just different companies along the way. So it's hard to keep process up and up to date while you're also doing everything else. And the only way leadership can get insight into that once you have enough people is asking for metrics, asking for estimates, trying to get gauges on the system.
It's good though. I mean,
OKRs were a thing that were really gross to me at first, and like now, I don't know how you do this without. It doesn't necessarily have to be OKRs, but you need metrics. Like in as much as we rely on metrics to tell us the health of our applications when they're running, you need metrics within a company to understand the health of the company.
But you're right that some companies, especially some tech companies, they don't care that much. It's a rhetorical question when they ask, why aren't you getting this done fast enough? But the nice thing is, in our experience, it's like when they ask that, it is an information. It's a real question. They're trying to get information on why this isn't getting done fast enough. It's not just a rhetorical question that is meant to spank
like,
engineers.
Reality still plays in. Like,
yeah.
There were points where my team wanted to work on a subsystem and we were screaming, we were begging, constantly hitting a wall over and over. Please give us the time to fix this subsystem. And it never came. And that ended up probably being okay. Like, you as an individual in this amorphous system can only focus on so much and can lose the context of everything that's happening around you. And if the system grows too fast without being capable of keeping you and everyone else up with it, which happens when you move this quickly, you lose the context you need to correctly prioritize. And that ends up feeling really frustrating for engineers. Like, I think the thing that engineers hate more than anything is feeling like they're working on the thing that isn't as important as what they know is the important piece to work on. Like, it really sort of sometimes feels like it's only a question of prioritization.
Makes sense. Kind of switching topics more to that managey side, we're talking about making that transition. What you gave me some really insightful stuff to think about. Like, specifically, I still remember just the fact that the way that you evaluate your own productivity and success has to change, and it becomes a very conscious thing. You're no longer completing projects alone or solving a specific problem. It's like you have to kind of find your success in the aggregate output of your team, but also not be sad when that doesn't meet whatever you were striving for, because, like you were saying, external things happen. It feels like everything gets much more complicated as you get into a management role in this tech world. What was that like for you? And what are some of the things that you want to highlight for people watching that might want to get into that?
It's a ton of fun, and it's really dependent on what size of company you're at and how much federated decision making you get, how much authority you're given along the way. Because I think as engineers, the expectation is that the expectation can be that as soon as you hit the management spot, you just get to make decisions. And the reality is kind of pretty high up the stack, especially from first level line manager to, one level up to director, and sometimes even higher than that. You don't get to just be a dictator, at least at Hashicorp, which is useful. That may be true at some places, but you have to be an expert collaborator, an expert negotiator, and you have to be willing to, if you want to do well and feel good at it, I think you have to be willing to pay attention to a lot. You need to really know what is happening at your company and where the priorities are, so that you can not make the right decisions just in the moment, but prep yourself to be able to execute on those decisions later on. One of the things that was hard for me transitioning was, as an engineer, you're given a project and your focus is that project until it's out the door. As an engineering manager, you're still given projects, but you can't focus just on them. They're the work, they're not the job. They're the thing that you end up putting effort into. They're the artifacts that you deliver, but you're now the person that's directly involved in the processes that make that project occur. So you have to be focused on the process. And if that project gets pulled out from under you halfway through or 2 weeks before, and you're now handed with something that is mission critical and highest priority, you just have to be able to attack it. So the job of a manager is keeping a team in that ready state, or being ready to defend against the company's whims, so that you can protect what you know is most important, so that you can protect the people on the team and let them accomplish the project that you know, regardless of what somebody's asking for this week, will be necessary 2 weeks down the line. So often managers are talked about as sort of filters or umbrellas, and that's in a way true, but it's bi-directional. It's not just from the company coming in. You also have to sort of recognize that sometimes the company's right, and you have to get things out from what you've been focused on really fast, so that you're not now an entire team of people focused on the wrong thing. That's detrimental for.
It's so trippy. The whole thing, honestly, that it literally sounds like you are describing a system, but the system I'm imagining is a much more, it's like an organic, like nervous system, basically, is what I'm hearing. It's like you kind of have filters, amplifiers, like you have these sort of sensing entities, like the team.
And to me, I've tried reading engineering manager books before, and I'm sure I just haven't read the right one yet. I give up on them. They just don't fit for how my brain wants to work. My brain is a problem solver. I've structured it to handle the consumption of abstract problems and figure out how to give them enough structure so that I can find the solution, but not so much structure that they are rigid, that they're incapable of evolving. If you can figure out for yourself how to modify the way you view whatever problem you're faced with to fit that same structure, take an abstract problem, figure out how to give it some structure within it, and make it so that it's still capable of being evolved over time. That works for code, that works for process, that works for people, that works for companies, it works for anything. It's having enough baseline knowledge, it's having enough context, it's having enough situational awareness, and being willing to problem solve along the way. The difference just is, instead of working on code, you're working on people. And that's not to say that in this people are the cogs that you're just putting into slots and manipulating. I don't even think of my code in that way. My code is very fluid, and it's merely a conversation between me and me from the past and me from the future, most likely, so that I can make sure who's ever reading this is good and has all the information they need. When I'm dealing with people as an engineering manager, I want to know them as a person. I want to know, I don't need to know what's going on in their personal life, but I want to know, like, how are they feeling in their work? What do they feel like their performance is? What kind of projects are they interested in next? Because the more information I have, the better fit I can make for both sides.
It's just so interesting. Yeah, the idea of all this stuff as a living system. I think that is, I know there's so many, engineering mindset is such a broad term, can mean so many things, many of which I agree with, many which I disagree with. But I think that it is like that. Yeah, keeping things, finding your way on that spectrum of, like, the specifications are too exacting to really leave you the flexibility for a solution, or they're too vague so you can't even pattern match the problem against stuff that you know. But I think the code metaphor is great because, again, not because people are automatons or like politics or whatever. It's just, in the same way that you look at a programming problem and you're like, oh, this is like a graph problem. I think I can use a bunch of shit other people have discovered about graph problems to go solve this thing. Right. It's that like lateral thinking, or like, thinking in metaphors or whatever, that pattern matching based on the context of having enough kind of theoretical knowledge inside of yourself, but still not like latching on to what you think the problem is at first glance or whatever. That's hard.
It's being a wanderer, but finding a touchstone to begin with that gives you enough context and enough of the words that you need. Sometimes just finding the right word is all you need to get started on something. And your database problem is a good one, because like you may take a distributed graph, like you might need to solve a problem with a distributed graph and start by researching distributed graphs, thinking this is exactly how it's going to end up. and keep reading and learn more and a little bit more. And by the end of it, what you've built looks totally distinct from what you thought you were going to build in the beginning. You know, the RFC process of Hashicorp is so cool to me because it is specifically not the artifact of what was created. It's the artifact of how what was created started. And it's not a record. It's not a record of what now exists. It's not
documentation. It's
a snapshot of a point in time. And seeing sometimes, especially for your own projects, what you thought you were going to do and what you ended up doing for all sorts of reasons, your own learnings, company changes, process requirement changes. If you can understand for yourself how you got from the starting points to where it ended, you have introspected enough to be able to handle the job of engineering management. Like, it is just that. It is knowing what happened. It's actually knowing what happened and trusting that your understanding is correct. Because I think a lot of people get into engineering management because they think they're a good engineer. They've seen bad engineering managers. They want to treat their people better. They want to, you know, give maintenance tasks the focus that they want. They want to do all of the things that all of us want to do. I don't think you'll be good. And I entered in with that mindset. You almost have to. Like, it gives you the gumption to think you can handle it. You can't, but it makes you think you can until you get in and realize the job is something different. The job is understanding process. It's understanding your process, and it's understanding other people's process and how to manipulate them. Not manipulate the people, but how to modify the process so that things can fit. Which I find, I think it's really interesting, and it's a slightly different shift from just, it's actually the same thing. When you go in and you think you want to be an engineering manager, you're focused on individual problems that you want to fix for, and the job isn't fixing individual problems. It's learning how to fix all the problems, regardless of what comes in.
You're not driving the car one part at a time. You're driving, the whole thing's glued together. Like, you're going there with all the parts together. So if you want to reshape the thing, you got to do the whole system.
I like to watch a lot of diverse stuff on YouTube, from like mechanical engineers to musicians to artists to whatever. And I don't do any of these things, but I like watching them because it's really useful to me to see how experts in other fields approach problems and try to fit the way I problem solve into their work, and to think how I would go through it. There's a lot of gaps. I can't solve nearly as much because I don't have the experience that they have, but often you find that the steps are similar along the way. So one of the things that came up recently for me was a synthesizer-based musician talking about the difference in making music and making music with modular synthesizers. It's less about figuring out the chords that you want to come in and the rhythm that you want to play and the sound that it should produce. And it's more about manipulating the inputs to let the machine randomly generate something that's beautiful. And it's still making music, but it's slightly different. And engineering feels a little like that to me.
That is interesting. That is very like, you are the god in this chaotic system, and all you need to do is set the initial conditions right. That's what you're experimenting with, a set of initial variables or conditions that then will just let the thing produce the right thing. It's one layer of abstraction.
Along the way. You're not writing sheet music that has a start and a finish that can be repeated over and over. You're putting together a patch of a lot of different subcomponents that you can manipulate when something doesn't seem quite right, and the whole thing just evolves without ever stopping in between.
I love it. I think that is very cool. It's so funny. The next question I was going to ask is like, what are the things that are not tech related in life that kind of inspired you to learn things that have actually turned out to be really useful in tech? And one of the things you just said is, I was obsessed when I was much younger with this kind of idea of kind of like Eastern philosophy and like Zen specifically. And then I was also doing martial arts at the time, and I realized like, oh, this is all a bunch of like simple mechanics and physics and machines, and different martial arts are not different at all. They're just maybe taking advantage. One martial art might be all about this one mechanic. They figured out how to use it really well, and they're like, this is awesome, we're going to do it for everything. Another art might do something else. And so that's where that idea started. And I was like, maybe if you get someone who's like great at cooking, and then someone who's amazing, master of painting, and then a master of writing code or something, that they have all kind of learned on some level the same lessons, just expressed slightly different, but that they would all have the sort of the same shapes inside, that they learned the same, I don't know what you'd want to call it, this is getting really philosophical, but
for sure.
those core insights of like, almost like these old like Zen sayings or whatever, that sound incredibly simplistic, but that like demonstrate some concept that's useful everywhere. It is simple sounding, but not simplistic. It's so abstract that you can apply it to so many things.
Which is the design mindset, I think. Like taking away everything that's superfluous and just leaving you with the core. And finding that core is hard. It's really, really hard to boil an idea or a thought or a concept down to one concrete sentence. And if you can do that and you do it well, it's kind of magic, because it ends up being, you get one sentence that ends up being applicable to so many different things. Yeah.
Magic is a good word. It becomes kind of like an incantation at that point. You have like distilled the essence of something that itself is just like a very powerful thing, like makes your mind seize it, right?
That point in your mind, I think, is the same skill. So for anybody that ever wants to get into engineering management, if you want to do it at the kind of place that I think that I enjoy working at, one that like rewards capable engineers and tries to improve itself and like wants to build something useful for the world, and like you don't want to just collect a paycheck, being a mentor or being a teacher ahead of time is really, really useful. So between my job before Hashicorp and Dell, I got to spend a few months being an instructor at a code academy, and got to teach people that came from totally different industries after me having gotten my computer science degree, teach them how to get into the computer science industry, how to get into the programming tech industry without having a CS degree. And that did two things for me. It showed that code academies aren't just a joke, that like there's more than one way to become a professional developer that doesn't require a 4-year degree. And the people that come out of it, or the people that are, if you're a senior engineer, it doesn't matter how you got there. You are a senior engineer, you're doing the work, and that's the only thing that matters day to day. So it was cool to know that there's not a prerequisite to be able to do any of this stuff other than a learning mindset, other than a desire in yourself to accomplish it. That was for me. But it was also useful for me as an individual, because I had gone long enough in my career that I had used my tools for a while, and I knew I could build things, but I hadn't had to articulate how I built anything. I hadn't had to articulate my process, my thoughts, my approach to approaching problems, and having to take your abstract process, the things that have just sort of organically evolved in your brain over time as you go from being a junior engineer to a mid-level engineer to a senior engineer, having to change that abstract thought into words that are consumable by people that don't have any context is incredibly hard. But if you can do that, you know what you're doing so much better than you did before. It gives you every ounce of confidence. After I stopped at the instructor job and did my next company interview, it was the easiest technical interview I've ever done in my life, because you could throw me at any problem. It was essentially a job of being thrown technical interview problems all day, every day, except you were teaching the person instead of interviewing the job. So the next job after that, it was easy to get into the door because I had just trained for months. But that is a skill in of itself, self-introspection. I don't know that it's a requirement for a good engineering manager, but I think it's incredibly helpful.
Only if you're managing Lisp projects. So yeah, that's fascinating. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I spent a lot of time reading about was, especially when I first made this YouTube channel a long time ago now, 10 years ago now, I I tried to like, okay, what does it really take to teach? I didn't want to just cargo cult what everyone else on YouTube was doing with like tech learning, which is like learn a whole programming language in an hour or whatever. And like those videos do very well. I'm almost mad at how well they do, but that's not how people learn stuff for real. You don't like memorize it from a video. And so one of the really key parts, you could almost call it a learning hack, that all these durable learning studies have shown is that one of the best things you can do is try to, when you're learning and absorbing new material, is to then immediately go teach it to somebody else. That's one of the things that cements it incredibly deeply. And one of the problems with human learning and durable learning specifically, durable learning just means like, you know, you can recall it later for those of you watching, is when you read something and you kind of conceptually understand it, your mind tricks you into thinking that you actually know it because you have this feeling, it's an emotion of understanding. But then of course, as soon as you stop and then someone says, well, what does that say or why? You actually have no idea why or what you even just read. Yeah, exactly. And what you just said is like, I mean, you probably just nailed the best way to study for technical interviews, right? It's like teach technical interviewing to other people.
Teach
like
someone else how to do your job for a weekend.
Exactly. Because they're going to ask you every question that an interviewer would, and they're going to ask you 3 whys deep, which will reveal to you that you only know 1 or 1.5 whys before you run out of like conceptual understanding of the problem. And you're like, I don't know, just do that. And it always works. And then you're like, shit, I'm just doing magic again under there.
But I think if you're capable of doing that, what you'll find as a professional in the industry is it will give you a leg up. It will give you a superpower that others haven't developed, because it's no longer about feeling like you haven't yet learned the thing that is a requirement for what's coming next. It's accepting that no matter what comes next, you'll learn it and figure it out. And when you're in those job interviews and you're doing the technical interview, you can tell when you know what you're doing and you feel good about what you do, you can tell if the company you're talking with is going to fit or not. Because if they're good, they'll recognize that you know what you're doing. They'll recognize that you know what you're talking about, and it won't matter that you miss, you know, a particular function when you're developing the set problem in the technical interview or something. It's not about that. The interviews at the good companies, those interviews are an excuse to get some kind of understanding of what you're capable of from a technical perspective. It's not in the same way that developing code, developing these products, it's very rarely about the artifact that you produce at the end. It's about the work you do along the way that's important for engineering.
Yep, it's about that process and about looking into a person's mind and how they, if they're honestly engineering or if they have a bunch of memorized patterns that they just try to throw at everything.
When I started interviewing people, I could tell within the first 10 minutes, if you knew what you were talking about. And sometimes if you didn't, that was okay. Like I might be able to put somebody in a position that, like, if I can tell you've got a strong footing on some subject, but you're really weak on something else I need, but I know how to work with this subject, we might be able to bring you up over here in a way that's useful. Sometimes it doesn't fit. And sometimes there was a long while at Hashicorp where even though I really wanted to have junior people on my team to let my senior engineers mentor against, because as we've described, the process of mentoring is not just beneficial for the junior person, it is incredibly beneficial for the senior person as well. It's a useful practice. The company couldn't handle it. You could not have stuck a junior engineer in Hashicorp in 2018 and if it's
unsurvivable
been productive. It would have been a bad fit.
There's, like you said before, at that startup scale, and this is not true of very small startups and it's not true of very large companies, but at that scale, when it's just like, it's about execution, it's about scaling, it's about quickly trying a bunch of stuff. It's like you said before, the cops aren't coming. Like you're alone and you have to figure it out. And the only thing you have to fall back on is your previous engineering kind of like database of experience plus the ability to learn, which is that most important thing. Right. Apropos hiring junior engineers, something that I also think is like incredibly great and healthy for a company and missing from a lot of companies in our industry. my favorite interview question is literally like pick anything that they don't know about and like learn it with them quickly and let them lead that learning process, because that is how they're going to approach 99% of
That's
the
the job.
problems they see, because they won't know them.
Right.
And yeah, exactly, that is the most relevant on the job performance like predictor I've seen, is like pick a random ass like tech subject. I don't know, graph problems if they have a comp sci background, ZFS if they're into storage. Like pick something that they have a hobby in but don't know about, and watch them. Like, do they try to get an outline of the subject before diving in? Do they get distracted by some rabbit hole 2 Wikipedia pages in and forget what the problem was? Do they? It's like, it's very representative of how someone performs in real life, and it doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but it just it's sort of demonstrative about how how they're going to actually tackle problems, because people tackle problems in a similar way. They either, they have some process that they use, and that's your way to kind of expose that and see it.
Right. And in that, while you're doing that as the engineering manager performing that interview, you have to quickly figure out what is this person's communication style, in what way are they most comfortable expressing to me what it is they're thinking, and also how do I make this person comfortable enough quickly in a thing that is incredibly stressful for them and is potentially their future job is on the line.
Yeah.
How do I get them to trust me enough in that moment to open up and let me into their process, especially if they've never attempted to get into that process for themselves. If they've never introspected enough to get in, then you kind of have to lead them down a path for a little while. You kind of have some relaxed banter back and forth. You have to be willing as the person doing the interview to share just about anything, to just be open and sort of showcase what it is you're looking for, because the practice is foreign to most people on the outset. When you're early in your career, you need like 95% context before you can go off and tackle a problem. You need to know what's being asked of you. You need to know how the system works in a good amount of way. You need to know like where your deliverables go after the fact, how it's being, you feel like you need a lot. When you get comfortable with the skill of being a computer science person or being a software developer, a software engineer, you can go down to like 80%. I feel like you can have fine level details of less and still feel comfortable, because you've got some domain expertise, right? Already you can kind of fill in the blank if something pops up that hasn't happened before. You've got more of like a spidey sense built up of past experiences that'll guide you down the right path. As you get more senior, and whether you go into management or you go down the engineering leadership track as a staff engineer or principal engineer or the rest of it, you don't have enough time to get that 80% granularity for the systems that you're responsible in. Possibly the systems are abstract enough or handled by enough people that it would actually be impossible for you to have that level of granularity, right? So you've got to get comfortable with less and less. You have to get comfortable with like knowing how 60% of this actually works, or maybe 40% of it actually works, and still being able to go in and do the job and feel like you can do the job and like you're not just lying, right? Like if you're a good engineer, I think, and you actually care about what you're doing and how you're doing it, the first little bit of being an engineering manager feels like you're just bullshitting everyone, because you kind of are. Like you're shifting in your mind what you know, and figuring out how to apply it to something that you don't yet know at all, and you're getting way less time to focus on what you need to know and how to figure it all out. That skill then makes you just even better at interviewing. Because a technical interview is just walking in and having no idea what's about to happen, and
trusting that instinct and being able to communicate that instinct, which is like often the most valuable thing, is not going in and spending 100% of the time solving a problem or pairing up with someone. I mean, I do pair with people, but it's getting a quick read on where the problem they're facing actually is, and then just sharing your like instinct about where to go to solve that more quickly. Is like, that's leveraging your time. It's not like being a repository of experience that gets like applied to solve problems end to end. Yeah.
And those engineers, what you're talking about, the curmudgeons that we used to have, the people that were the scary gremlins in the corner that you
Yeah.
had to go ask a question of, I have yet to meet someone that makes me feel like my understanding is wrong. I think those curmudgeons aren't as good. I think they have a layer of fear based on a distrust of their ability to either explain what it is they know,
Yeah.
or a lower confidence in what it is they know. If
You got to
can be
defend it so hard. You can't be secure in.
right,
Yeah.
if you can be the person that can hear someone else's problem and not tell them how to do it, but to suggest how you would do it and let them into your process. And sometimes they take your advice and sometimes they don't. You know, as that lead engineer, that it'll probably work out no matter what. That's when you're good. That's when you've actually got your feet underneath you, I think. Imposter syndrome for me has been the center point of my career almost the entire time. I haven't believed that I was capable of doing this job for the longest time. And it is an incredibly hard thing to accept, that you know what you're doing and that you're pretty good at it. But if you do these things, if you just apply the way you think about the work to the way that you do the work, you end up in the same place. Like, you are good at this stuff.
Yeah.
If you weren't good at this stuff, you wouldn't have the job to begin with. So use the thing that's given you this job on the job, on yourself, to improve yourself along the way too.
I like that. I think that is a very fitting final thought to leave people with. And it's really interesting because everyone I interview leaves more or less with that thought of like, you can do it. Maybe it's just like the Hashicorp thing, but
sure. I mean, like, yeah, but our reality, Hashicorp, Google, Dell, mom and pop startup of 2 people down the street. No one knows how tech companies are supposed to run. Like, the tech company we have now, where regardless of where you work, did not exist 20 years ago. Like, the industry didn't exist 40 years ago. Like, this stuff is brand new. So to think that we have to learn something that's already established is wrong. And to think that what we've developed now will persist through infinitum is wrong. The job is chaos. The space is new and evolving. The job is iteration and holding on and figuring out how you fit.
So cancel that Scrum Master certification process. Stop trying to hold on to the horse and just let this crazy thing take you where it's going to take you.
Yeah, Scrum is the biggest piece of shit in the world.
Now that is a fitting final thought. I'm going to leave that in there.
I mean, you can learn it if you want, but it's not going to fix anything. It's fine.
Yeah, nor does anyone actually do it the way even that they imagine, even though if they did, it still wouldn't work the way they imagine. So it's all made up.
If you know it and the system you're in needs it, it just causes less turmoil for you. But you've learned how to do everything else in your job. You could probably figure out how to do Scrum.
On that note, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, of course, this was fun.
It's a good one as always. And I feel like for all the ones we've had that I have not been able to record, where I've afterwards scribbled down notes to think about, this is just going to make it easier for me to like stay in the moment so I can review this video later and learn stuff. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was fun. Thanks for taking the time.
Do you have anything you want to promote or link to at the end? Causes, personal things, projects you're interested in?
This is my cat.
Well, that's worth it.
We could promote my cat. Now he's asleep. Cosmo's also sleeping somewhere. No, I don't do anything other than it's the other part that's maybe important. I don't code outside of work. I barely get on a computer outside of work. Like, it's critical for me to have a diverse life experience to be able to keep my mind abstract and applicable to a diverse problem set. Like, not the guy working on open source projects on the weekends.
It's like, honestly, it's like inversely correlated to how long you've been in the industry. Very, very few people keep that up. And the ones that do usually do it at a pretty high price in terms of
Yeah.
their normal lives.
Some of those people are amazing. Like we get to work with
Yeah.
some of those people
Yeah.
that are like, wow,
Yeah.
you're what
And
good looks like.
and it's like for so long I was like, oh, to once work with like geniuses like that, and now often I'm like, I now see how this is possible, and kind of like that's not free. It doesn't come free. Like
Oh yeah, there's trade-offs.
it has a trade-off. Like everything else, it's just another engineering thing with the trade-off. It's like
No
you
right
can do
answer.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever fits for you is right.
Exactly. But if you're into like lying on beaches and drinking caipirinhas like Casey and I are, you know, it's like you might want to round out your life. It'll also make you better at your job. So
Yeah. No, I mean, the other important thing along my career path has been most of the products I've worked at, most of the products I've worked on, all of the products I've worked on, aside from Hashicorp stuff, no longer exist. And some of the companies I worked at no longer exist.
Scary thought. Yeah.
To think that like any of this matters other than what it matters in your interaction with the people around you and the life experiences that you gain along the way. That's the only part that's important. You have to have fun along the way while you're doing it. You have to get out of this job the things that you need, and that can be a lot of stuff. It can be money, it can be time, it can be freedom, it can be connections, it can be a network, it can be anything. And those are all valid choices. It's just figure out your requirements.
Back to where we started. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. Thank you. That was fun. Are we waving bye? Goodbye, YouTube.
Let's both let's be like influencers and put our, yeah, exactly, onto the camera.
Is this how Twitch works?